Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and it's time for another edition of Breaking News, our second one today for this Wednesday, the 19th day of June, 2024. And as always, from the time we give our first edition of Breaking News till this, there's story after story after story that has something to do with what the Bible says our world is going to be like at the time of the end of the age before the second coming of Christ and the events that precede it. Now, the first three stories are going to be about the USA, about America. We're going to see the good and the bad here, and the ugly, I guess we'd call it. First, the good. This is a great headline. We always like to give good news. There's not a whole lot of it, but this is a great headline. There's a new Louisiana law requiring the Ten Commandments to be displayed in all classrooms. This comes from the Epoch Times. Not a great story. Louisiana has become the first state to enact a law mandating that the Ten Commandments be prominently displayed at all public schools and colleges. Under a bill that became law on June 18th, Louisiana schools that receive state funds will have to display the Ten Commandments in each building it uses and classroom in each school under its jurisdiction. The bill specifies that the text must be presented as the main focal point of a poster or framed document measuring at least 11 inches by 14 inches in a large and easily readable font. Isn't that great? This is the USA I knew, I grew up in. Doesn't seem to be the country we live in anymore. And so maybe we'll all move to Louisiana, huh? But actually, it's a great state too. It's wonderful, wonderful people. Trouble is, in the summer it gets very hot and very humid, and you know, food's great though. And those, boy, I tell you, that Cajun food is the best. Anyway, I wanted to share that to start out. It's always nice to hear some good news. There was at least one state now that requires the Ten Commandments to be displayed in all classrooms. So watch, of course, the lawsuits against that. But I think that's great news. Now, that's the good. Here's the bad. Oregon track and field coach fired. Why? He asked state officials to protect single-sex sports. I kid you not. In fact, when I heard the story that a track coach was fired in the U.S. for asking officials to protect single-sex sports, first state I thought of was Oregon. Unfortunately, the leftist state there. There's a few others I thought of also, but Oregon comes to mind. Okay, here's the story. The head track and field coach at a high school in Oregon has been fired after writing letters to state officials expressing his concerns about allowing biological males to compete with girls. John Parks, who had been employed at Lake Oswego High School since January of last year, says his contract was terminated shortly after he began speaking out against the trans-identified males self-identifying into female races. Park explains that he first wrote the Oregon Student Activities Association with his concerns just before the controversial May 18th state championships, where a trans-identified male student participated with the girls. The student, Aiden Gallagher, had been the source of much outcry after dominating a number of races in the qualifying matches leading up to the state championships. In April, Gallagher won multiple awards in girls' varsity races, but he finally secured his place at state on May 9th, where he took 2 gold medals at the Portland Interscholastic League meet. Gallagher ultimately seized first place in the girls' varsity 200 meters at the championship and was booed upon when he took the winner's podium. You really can't make this stuff up, can you? I mean, it's hard to believe how far our country has degenerated. And this sort of thing, if someone would have told us just a few years ago that we'd be talking about something like this, and that some male who identifies as a female who couldn't make it as a male track runner, then he wins state championships. And we've done stories in the past, which are really sad, where young ladies who've worked their whole lives and great athletes have actually lost scholarships because they didn't come in first or second in state championships and state finals, because some male who identified as a female decided to race instead and won the race, even though they are biologically XY chromosomes, not double X. So anyway, the good in Louisiana, the bad in Oregon, and now the ugly. Here's a report. The Biden campaign creates a special task force to mitigate against what they call cheap fake videos. This is a term they've coined, actually. The Biden campaign reportedly created a special task force to reduce the impact of videos that show the president malfunctioning in public. Sounds like something you'd say about a robot, but this is from, I think, what's the Federalist News site, I think. White House aides have become more sensitive about the videos of President Joe Biden and have begun to quarrel with their media allies about the coverage of Biden's age, his gaffes, and videos exposing moments of strange confusion. I think it's a Breitbart story, actually. Anyway, the White House invented the term cheap fakes after a video on Sunday showed former President Barack Obama walking Biden off stage after the president appeared to freeze at a fundraiser. Now, the Federalist had a story similar to this. The author said, please don't tell me what my eyes see isn't reality with respect to the president. And so this is something, it seems every day Biden makes a new gaffe and says something or does something that shows he's totally incapable of holding the job of the president of the United States. And yet the fake news tries to play it, not mention it. They don't play it up, and so it's sad. But the campaign now is going to create a special task force, and they invented this term "cheap fakes" because they said it's all fake. This is not really what happened, except it's their own video that they shot that we see, and we see these things do happen. In other words, don't believe your eyes, believe us. So I guess that would be the ugly. So the good, Louisiana, bad, Oregon, and the ugly, the Biden campaign here. All right, let's move now to Israel. Headline for Hezbollah's Nasrallah threatens the Galilee invasion and warns Cyprus over ties to Israel. The leader of the Lebanese terror group, his name is Hassan Nasrallah, I think that's his first name. He says basically Hezbollah doesn't seek a full-scale war with Israel, but he's gloating about the number of northern Israeli evacuees that have had. We talked about that yesterday with Caroline Glick's article, by 80,000. So he warns the Cypriot government, this is interesting too, Cyprus, against allowing Israel to use its military bases and airports. So he's given this warning. He's saber-rattling and threatening. You don't want a full-scale war, but he's talking about there will be something very bad that will come upon Israel, will get even worse than it is. So he's their general secretary. His name's Hassan Nasrallah. On Wednesday, he said the war with Israel, addressed the war with Israel by stating in a speech, an invasion of the Galilee remains on the table if the confrontation escalates. Well, who's escalating? Friend, it's you that's doing it. And we talked about the Red Beret group there. These people, about 1,500 of these soldiers wearing red berets in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which seems to indicate they're a fighting force, an invading force. We will see. And so it's on the table, invasion of Galilee. They threaten Cyprus for the first time because they allow Israel to use its airports and bases for military exercises. So we've got him saber rattling. Now we have a couple other stories. An Israeli official reportedly says Nasrallah's speech shows that he's distressed. An unnamed senior Israeli official is quoted by the Ynet news site as saying that today's speech by Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah shows he is distressed. Nasrallah is distressed by the strident messages conveyed to him by the U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein and by the Israeli remarks that indicate a change of direction, the source says. Now, the change of direction, of course, is they've agreed upon a plan, a war plan. The Israeli generals, should they need to invade southern Lebanon and get rid of these Hezbollah fighters that are there where there shouldn't be. As we've mentioned before, according to, was it 2006, after the war there in Lebanon, there was a UN, basically a UN stipulation that they had to move back, that is, from the Israeli border, something like 18 miles. There's a river called the Litani River, and any soldiers, any fighters had to move back beyond that. There's supposed to be a UN force guarding that. Well, that was never carried out. They're there, they're close to the border. They never paid attention to the UN resolution. And so Israel has, put up with this. But now with all the bombs that are going off, the drones, the mortars, and various shells that are being fought that set down south towards Israel, they're ready for a change of direction. And there's another headline, and why Nasrallah would be upset. He realized that the IDF can kill him. The Hezbollah leadership is shaken after the Israeli elimination of a couple of their top leaders. The powerful elimination worries Hezbollah members. They now understand that the IDF knows much more about them than they know about us, said Professor Amatzia Bahram. In other words, we know where you are, pal, and if we want to take you out, we can. Now, supposedly Nasrallah has kind of lived underground for the last X number of years. I don't know if that's true or not, but he's afraid to even surface because he's afraid his life will be taken. So anyway, Now, recall, we've cited Caroline Glick twice, carolineglick.com. There's an article she did called Responding to Hezbollah's Strategic Offensive. We cited it yesterday, making the point that Lebanon is run by Hezbollah, which means it's run by Iran. It also means they're not interested in any type of ceasefire, which are getting pushed right now. This morning, we looked at their short-term goal. What's their short-term goal? Taking land from Israel's north in an eventual peace treaty if Israel can't get rid of the threat. In other words, they're looking at the high grounds called Mount Dov. They're at the top of the Golan Heights. It's a border between Lebanon and Israel. The Golan Heights is this area where Israel borders both Syria and Lebanon, but this particular area, Mount Dov, would be in Lebanon, as it were. And so she talked about this is their eventual goal, to basically do it piecemeal, to get into a strategic military position there where this would be under their control, where they can do their eventual goal, and that is eliminate the modern state of Israel. Well, now we're going to continue on with her story, her column, by the way, and she's going to respond to Hezbollah's strategic offensive. This is what she's talking about next. I want to read this and comment on it because it's got some really interesting things biblically here. She says, given the strategic imperative of defeating Hezbollah and preventing it from achieving operational or strategic control over northern Israel, the question is, how should Israel proceed? And that's a great question. What are they going to do? The answer begins with the strategic imperative. Israel must end Hezbollah's reign of terror over northern Israel. It must degrade their military capacity to the point that Hezbollah is no longer able to strike Israel at will. To achieve this goal, Israel needs to take control over the Lebanese side of the border, destroy Hezbollah forces south of the Litani River, and then remain in place in southern Lebanon for the foreseeable future. In other words, go some 18 miles into Lebanese territory, take that over, and keep Hezbollah away from the border there. Such a goal, she says, of course, is easy to declare, but far more difficult to achieve. Realistically, to accomplish this objective, Israel needs to vastly increase the size of its standing and reserve forces and possess the military industrial capacity to arm its forces independently, rather than, again, trusting the United States to help them arm. This is a very important point. Israel is already working to achieve both of these objectives. However, industrial independence and the enlargement military forces take time to achieve, and time is of the essence. The residents of the North, now scattered in hotels throughout the country, cannot be expected to wait years to return to their homes. And here's why they're in such a mess. Then Prime Minister Ehud Barak, he was a leftist prime minister, terrible, terrible job he did. He decided to surrender the security zone in southern Lebanon to Hezbollah in May of 2000. And that's the reason the terror organization was able to build its forces to the point where it poses an existential threat to Israel's survival. By committing itself to reversing his move, Jerusalem will place itself on the road to victory. The government will brace the public for the road ahead and provide the general staff and lower echelons of the IDF with the required guidance for developing and carrying out tactical missions that will advance Israel's ultimate goal. So how they go about it is going to be very important. She goes on to talk about that. So we need to pray for Israel that the Lord would guide them. Why? Because what do you think? The U.S. and the international community will try and coerce Israel to making some sort of deal, some sort of ceasefire. And what are they going to ask them to do? To give back part of the land. Now, remember, the Golan Heights was taken in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War, and it was taken by Israel from Syria, actually. And since that time, and from actually it was 73, it wasn't 67, maybe it was 67, I'm sorry, 67 or 73, one of those two wars, it was basically the Golan was taken over by Israel. And basically from that time, the world has said it still belongs to Syria, even though it was taken in a war. And yeah, I believe it's 67 now, I come to think about it. Anyway, it was taken by from Syria by Israel in a war there in 67, which Israel was blamed for starting it, which is a whole nother subject, but they didn't start it. But the bottom line is the world has seen it and still declares it as Syrian territory, although the U.S. under the Trump administration finally said, no, this belongs to Israel, which was literally unheard of at which they said at the time. Of course, this is something that has been hugely disputed here. So anyway, the U.S., you've got the international community saying, though, you can see this happening, can't you? The war going on, fighting, people dying, show all the citizens that get injured and killed there, the Lebanese. And And then they'll say, we need a ceasefire, we need peace. Israel, why don't you just give up this one piece of land, Mount Dov, this it's called the Sheba Farms, way on the top there of the Golan. Give them that, and let's call it a day. Something like that seems to be their goal, because as Caroline Glick says, they're trying to do this, trying to piecemeal get there to ultimately exterminate Israel, to annihilate them, and they need to do it, parcel by parcel. So we'll see. That's their ultimate goal. And so how they go about it, she said, is going to be important, because they have to do it in such a way it gets the job done, but you don't have the international community yelling and screaming at Israel like they're doing with Gaza and Hamas. So anyway, need to pray for their guidance and just see what happens. Now, there's an interesting question that came up when I was looking at this. It talks about in Ezekiel 38, when the armies that will invade Israel in the future, that's going to be like, that's not what's going on now at all. It's going to be a Russian invasion, but when the various armies, with Russia at the head, comes into Israel, it specifies when they come into the borders of Israel, that's when the Lord gives them the whammy. That's when he judges them. That's when the judgments come from heaven. You read about that, the big blocks of ice fall from the sky, the hail, the earthquakes that take place, where basically they're lost. They're killing each other, and Israel doesn't have to lift a finger, because it's a supernatural work there, the destruction of these armies, and all the armies will be destroyed. They won't leave anybody there. They'll die on the mountains of Israel. So the question I thought of today, I thought, the mountains of Israel. Well, right now, the mountains of Israel, that's it's in part of the area that God gave Abram, is where the Golan Heights is. They took it again, and that was 67 from the 6-Day War. They, gathered the Judea, the mountains of Israel, and the such like, and it's in their hands. So my question to myself was, does that mean the mountains of Israel will still be in their hands when the ultimate Ezekiel 38, 39 invasion takes place? In other words, will that be their territory, or will it be in the hands of somebody else? Now, when you read the scripture, it seems to indicate that this is once they get into the borders of Israel itself, between, they pass through Syria, Lebanon, they get into Israel. That's when God gives them the whammy. That's when the judgments come. Now, if that's the case, it could mean that Israel will not eventually have to give up any of that territory. They really shouldn't, up at the Golan Heights, up at the border. It's called Sheba Farms, where actually the wonderful Druze people live up there, are very, very, very faithful to the Israeli government. And so does this mean, and I was just asking myself the question, I don't know the answer, I'll have to do some more work on it. Does this mean that Israel will not have to ever give this up in some type of skirmish now with Hezbollah? They won't have to do some type of peace deal to give up this strategic piece of land, because that is the mountains of Israel right there. Now, I don't know. I don't know if the scripture is that specific where the mountains of Israel, where the border is at the time of this invasion, but it is an interesting question. The Golan Heights is a disputed area. It's been occupied, yes, since 67 by Israel. And there's the whole legal status is a question. Its history, its legal status is a huge, huge question. And so, like I said, the world still believes it belongs to Syria. Israel took it illegally. They've been fighting this for years, but Israel's been occupying it. And what's really strange, on all our trips to Israel, we always go up to the Golan Heights. And it's usually the sleepiest, there's just this farmland up there. You go up the hills, you take the bus up because it's up the mountains. And there's supposedly soldiers there, but they were never doing anything because it was peaceful for so many years until now, which has become anything but peaceful. And what's really strange is one thing that happened on one of our trips. The guide got us out. It was in the evening. We were there. We stay in the Galilee, about an hour drive up from Tiberias to the border. And he gets us out of the bus, and the sun was setting. And what was fascinating, we saw these lights in the distance. All right. And he says, do you know what these lights are that you're seeing? And we said, no, that's why we pay you to be our guide. So tell us what we're seeing here. We don't know that. He said, you're seeing the lights of Damascus, Syria in the distance. You are closer now to Damascus than you are to the hotel we stayed in last night, and we're still staying in tonight. That's how close everything is. But the Golan Heights has always been this sleepy area. You take a nap driving up there, because it's really restful in that. There's never been any problem. except in the last few years now it's become a hotspot and a flashpoint of the war, and it's a huge one right now. And sadly, because the northern Israel, Metula, Kiryat Shmona, that whole area, it's a great area to visit, and it's the border between Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. But sadly now it's 80,000 people living in hotels, like Caroline Glick says, and can't stay there for years. In fact, today there was the claim, and we'll end with this, from one of the Israeli generals, that by September the people will be able to move back. Well, we will see, won't we? So anyway, pray for them. A lot going on. To find out what the Bible says, where the final this will all end up, please look at our website, Educating Our World. We have 65 books there on 11 different subjects, 12 books on this subject of Bible prophecy, where you can download them for free. We never charge for anything. There are yours to take advantage of, where we thoroughly explain all these things that are going on. All right. Thank you for watching. I'm Don Stewart. And until tomorrow, may the Lord, as always, richly, richly bless you.